A very warm welcome from Lahore in Pakistan to this special School of Tomorrow digital event in collaboration with the PISA for Schools team. I'm Lawrence Burke, the moderator for this session. You'll see at the bottom of your screen two buttons, one to submit questions to the panel and one for feedback when the session is ended. I'm delighted to be joined by four very distinguished guests from across the world today. We have Dr. Joanne Caddy, Senior Policy Analyst with the OECD's Directorate for Education and Skills, coming in to us from Paris. We have Ms. Jill Akers-Clayton, Senior PBL Specialist and Senior Learning Designer with Fielding International, coming to us from Texas in the USA. We have with us Professor Dr. Ger Graus, OBE, Global Director for Tanzania, coming to us from the UK and Northern England. And we have with us Mr. Nasser Kusuri, the Executive Director for the Beacon House Group, coming into us from Lahore and Pakistan. So very warm welcome to you all. I understand we have viewers joining us from 70 countries, so a very warm welcome to everybody for this session. The Director General of the WHO recently said, "Make no mistake, we have a long way to go. This virus will be with us for a long time." So in the light of this, how is the global pandemic affecting K-12 schooling across the world? Joanne, would you like to begin by sharing with us the work that the OECD is doing with member and non-member countries?
Yes, thank you very much, Lawrence, and thank you for this opportunity to be on this panel. I think you've already really framed the issue. There is a global challenge facing our education systems, and there will be no possibility of finding a single solution that will fit everyone. But if we don't pool our various attempts at finding a solution, we won't get very far very fast. So I want to thank you very much for this opportunity. I will just be very brief in maybe reminding everyone of facts that you're already well aware of. You know, UNESCO has been leading a lot of work amongst international organizations in trying to compile the damage or the impact. And about 70% of the world's students in K-12 are currently not in school. This is unprecedented, and 150 countries have got full country school closures. Now, it's true that some countries are beginning to open up, and that might be something we can address in this panel about how do you do that in a responsible and effective way. But I think the other thing, just to give a heads up on what the OECD is doing, we've had two different surveys go out, one at the very beginning of the crisis in March, and a publication came out very quickly afterwards. I'd like to sort of share today some of the highlights of our new survey, which will be published next week, which comes under the title of Schooling Disrupted, Schooling Rethought, because one of the aspects that we're beginning to tackle at the OECD Directorate for Education and Skills is how do we get coherent and coordinated government responses from ministries of education, but not just at the ministry level, at the classroom level. And so that's raising a lot of issues about resilience of school systems and perhaps new purposes. So that survey went out and came back with 1,300 responses from 59 countries. And one of the major learnings from this quick sort of poll on what is happening in countries at the moment is really that the level of school closures, the loss of instructional time is really very significant. It's between 40 and 45 days. That's an average of the countries that were polled. That's about a trimester. It's a very big piece of an education year for students from K to 12. So we really have to grapple with what that means, what that will mean, both in the immediate return to school, but also in the medium and long term. So I would just like to leave it there and simply say that the OECD's Directorate for Education and Skills, together with the rest of the OECD, has a digital hub on tackling the coronavirus. There are about 90 policy briefs on that hub covering all issues from health to environment to tax and education, of course. And our blog also is a really good place to go for small pieces of tackling issues around equity, special needs, and vulnerable students as well. So I'll leave it there, but thank you very much for this opportunity to join the panel today.
Okay, thank you, Joanne. Jill, over to you. Just need to unmute your mic, Jill. Yeah.
Thank you. The new statement in almost all of our Zoom calls, someone has to unmute. So at Fielding International, we're really looking at the stance of how we're starting to gather as collective communities to really tackle these issues and going from a gathering to a transformation stance. So we've spent the last 2 months really organizing these panel discussions to look for the emerging themes and patterns. And for us, it's really broken down to taking local action, giving that power back to the local communities, because there's such a variation of impact on students and families based on their local positioning. Ensuring that we are taking a deep dive into the social and emotional learning aspects through this process. So we brought in Young Zhao, Tom Vander Ark, Emily Liebtag, Susie Boss, really looking at how experts are reimagining pedagogical practices and then looking at it through that local lens. And really, our final theme was about equity. How do we look at the equity issues that are impacting all of us globally, knowing that 40% don't have access. They don't have access to devices. They don't have access to data plans. So really our job is, and our lens is, how are we going to reimagine learning spaces in this global pandemic, really going from a brick and mortar experience to a hybrid experience, and ensuring that all learning spaces are equitable and safe and provide that learning environment that will support kids not only in what they've missed in those 45 days, but in these sort of rolling blackout experiences that we anticipate, knowing that this is not coming to an end. How do we move from these gathering conversations around this pandemic to really transformation? And that's been a big deep dive for us here in the States.
Okay, thanks, Jill. Dr. Gert, I'm sure you've got sort of some quite sort of deep insight into this. What are your thoughts?
Firstly, Lawrence, thanks for the invitation, and I would much rather be with you in person in the wonderful Lahore than being remote. I think one of the things, first and foremost, just a couple of observations. One is, this is intensely personal. So what's going on for everybody concerned is intensely personal. And I detect the danger that much of the conversations that are going on everywhere are about systems and structures and catching up and 45 days and all of those things are important, but we mustn't lose sight of the fact that many young people, and indeed their parents, their lives have changed quite significantly, right? That's firstly. Secondly, I think we talk a lot about the 45 days lost. I think we also, and lost, that is in terms of the status quo and being ready to be tested or whatever it is, right? I think we also need to perhaps reflect a little bit on what they've gained. And certainly from my perspective, if I look at my 14-year-old daughter, I had no idea how incredibly well organized she would become, and how she structures her day, and how she deliberately leaves her room when she wants a break from work. And all those bits and pieces, I think, are skills acquired or brought out by young people that we never really looked at. So I think every cloud does have a silver lining. I think what's happening is that what's happening globally is that this crisis is shining lights, and it's shining lights sometimes in places that are good, and sometimes it's shining lights in places that are not so good. And Jill already referred to the fact there's a lot of talk about online. Well, that online, quite frankly, is for the privileged. There is no online. So in the UK, we've got a Secretary of State for Education running around with 200,000 laptops to give out to the most underprivileged children, who can then take the laptop home and haven't got access to the internet. So I think there are some reality checks. I think the other light that's been shone is on leadership. Leadership big, political, and leadership local. Where there has been good leadership, be that in schools or regionally or locally or in companies or indeed in government, it is quite clear that those organizations, those societies, communities have coped well. Where there has been a lack of transparency and poor leadership, I think those communities suffer. So good and a big pat on the back for brilliant head teachers and brilliant teachers, I think. And I think that's incredibly important. And then finally, Lawrence, if I may, I'd like to say something about schools, because as I travel the world going around all the big EdTech conferences, I've been told for years that schools won't be needed towards the end of the 21st century. We'll do everything remotely and everything from home. I think that myth has gone for good. And I would bring in the motto from Barcelona Football Club, which is Més que un club, more than a club. I think what we are seeing is més que una escola, more than a school. The role of the school has changed, and the more disadvantaged the children's context is, the more important the role of the school has become. And then the very final point, and one sentence, is I think we need to be very clear that we distinguish between schooling and education in our discussion going forward. Mm-hmm. I'll stop there, Lawrence, for now at least.
Okay, thank you so much. Good, thank you. And Nasser, from your perspective, both as a key leader in education in Pakistan and as a parent, so what are your thoughts on the points that have been raised so far?
Sorry, the unmute issue. Firstly, thank you for having me on the panel, Dr. Burke. Obviously, it's it's as educationists, it's an immensely personal topic for us. I just want to, before I speak about anything specific to Beacon House or private schools, I want to talk about some of the concerns that I have in terms of the impact that this could have on developing countries like Pakistan. The impact 45 days of no instruction and the cascading effect that might have. I think in developing countries, one of the things that we need to be fairly cognizant of is that it's been quite an uphill battle to get kids to go to school in the first place, particularly girls. There's always been a gender inequity when it comes to school-going children in these countries, and my fear is that if children don't go to school for a prolonged period of time, it may further exacerbate those gender inequities. A certain number of boys may end up going back to school, but girls maybe not so much. So, at a time when the government is trying desperately to increase school enrollment, I'm not sure I'm very happy about people getting out of the habit of sending their children to school. This, naturally these lockdowns and COVID have an economic impact. People may have economic imperatives if this situation is not managed sensibly, where they have to get their children back to work. In developing countries, children are often seen as working hands. And if the lockdown is not managed sensibly, and if economic need is not balanced against the need to protect people from this virus, that economic compulsion may also play into a drop in future school enrollments or children going back to school. So that is something that I'm fairly cognizant of. Education is a it's a basic need. It's a fundamental human right. To things like health and shelter and food. It's really a basic fundamental need for prosperity and life for all young people. So I feel that, at least in Pakistan, one of the things that I'm a bit concerned about is that the government seems to have been more proactive in opening up restaurants and shops, all of which actually in the Pakistani context, if you look at the way people have been crowding into these spaces, present a much greater risk to public health than schools do. As children are less susceptible, and in schools, maintaining SOPs is much easier. So as a Pakistani citizen, and as a Pakistani parent, I worry about how gender inequity may increase.
Just had a little problem with Nasser's connection. He'll be back. But on that note, on those points that Nasser's raised and Gur pointed out about the personal nature of this crisis, and Jill, you touched upon it. Joanne, what do you see as some of the proactive policy developments and so on that the OECD is undertaking, particularly in developing countries like Pakistan, leaving aside the fact that schools have been shut for such a very long time? Pakistan has a large number, around, I believe it's over 20 million children who are out of school. And it is very much a personal experience, and the learning gaps that you talked about. Do you think this is going to have a much more deeper impact in the developing world than in the developed world?
There's no doubt, which is why this panel is so excellent, because we're getting perspectives from very different profiles of countries and of students and of families. I think what is important, maybe just to follow up on what's been said by everyone, is this enormous and legitimate focus on inequities that were already existing in the previous system have been brought into sharp relief. And that one sort of encouraging aspect of the OECD survey, which was from many more countries than OECD member countries, which is 37, came in from over 50, is that 90% of the respondents, who were both education officials, teachers, and school leaders, was that in their plans for school reopening, they are making provisions for focusing on the most vulnerable, those most impacted by school closures. And this is important because we know from all countries that the risk of dropout is high amongst large numbers of populations in the schools. That's just true for all OECD countries. There are many that struggle with, on a good day, 15% of dropout risk. And that's too much to handle. These are enormous impacts. The OECD has done a lot of work on what is the impact on an individual's life of a school dropout, both in terms of obviously educational opportunities, but earning opportunities. It's huge, and it's huge for society. So this is why the issue of school closures, as Nasser has quite rightly said, is not just an issue for educators in their corner. It is for the whole of society. And while the aspects of school reopening, some of the things that were said in this sort of survey was the importance of looking at the most vulnerable population, special needs students, for example, but also those who are transitioning. There's a very delicate moment in people's lives when you leave high school or you transition from one level of education to the next. So these are some of the populations within the student population that should and must get particular attention. Now, how to grapple with that, that will be very much, as I think everyone has indicated, on a sort of regional or school structure basis. There's not going to be any one prescription that will fit any one jurisdiction. At the same time, the issue of how will we not just make up the instructional time lost, because that is too reductive. And I agree with Gary when he says that's a very reductionist approach to, we've lost 45 days, we better make up the 45 days. It is far wider than that. We have a lot of work on about the importance of schools, not just as places of learning in the traditional sense of the imparting of knowledge. The whole OECD Education and Skills Directorate emphasis is on competences on not just what you know, but what you know how to do with what you know, which is the basis of the PISA framework. So the Program for International Student Assessment, which is over 80 countries that do this survey of 15-year-olds' knowledge every 3 years, is very important to understand that it's not just maths, reading, and science. It's how to solve problems, how to think like a mathematician, how to think like a scientist. And very importantly, the student questionnaire in PISA also gives us insights into students' motivation for learning. So one question we have in our directorate, and we're beginning to respond to as PISA for Schools, which is a version of PISA that's offered to school level, so that school principals get a picture or a report on their students' competences, is the very rich insights from the student questionnaire, which basically says how they feel about school, how the importance of school, their relationship with teachers, the classroom disciplinary climate, their linking of studying science to their future career aspirations, the instrumental and intrinsic motivation for learning. So the PISA for Schools project is actually very solicited at the moment, because we do need to get back to some form of schooling. Let's talk about what that should look like, because I don't think it's going to look like the before version. But we do need to have some form of an assessment of learning gaps, not just for cognitive standard content, but for the social emotional skills that Gareth quite rightly mentioned for his daughter, because self-directed learning requires a very advanced set of social emotional skills of self-control, of pacing oneself, of having and setting reasonable objectives. So those are what we should be looking at, because they have been sorely under-delivered. So I'd leave it there, but I think the issues of inequity is going to be central for the new design.
Right. Okay, good. Jill, I think it'd be great for you to come in here because, you know, despite the United States being sort of considered one of the world's richest countries, it has quite a troubled public schooling sector, doesn't it? How do you see this all sort of playing out within the public sector in the United States, and what's your sort of experience of it?
So I can start from a personal experience with my own children in the public school sector, feeling distanced, a lack of clarity around where students and teachers will be going in the future. What will school look like in the fall? There's been the online experience for this year has ended, and public schools are going to retreat. So around the country, public schools are retreating internally to try and figure out what this process will look like, where at the same time we have 27 million families in America who depend on school as their childcare. So when we think about public schools' response and the equity issues that our public schools are dealing with, it's coming down to, within that retreat, what are the ways in which we can reemerge with schools that are going to meet the needs of these 27 million families that need not only childcare, but a way to reimagine what assessment and outcomes look like. And for the public school sector in the United States, that's a really challenging experience when buildings are designed to hold 25-to-1 classrooms. We have teachers who have a real inequity in training and experience with delivering instruction via online. So as our schools have retreated and started to look at these plans, there's a whole mix and array of options that will come out across the country. And whether they're hybrid, whether they're trying to meet social distance guidelines, the US is struggling with how will we support families and businesses and entities and government as we have kids who are going to school 2 and 3 days a week. They're in social distance learning experiences, and then social distance within learning buildings and old buildings that are 19th century buildings designed for this industrial era, when we're really now into a new era of post-COVID learning. And this collective traumatic disruption in the US has really caused folks to retreat and figure out what it will look like with a lack of clarity for parents, for businesses, and for students. Because many of our students experience the opportunity to have a space online or at home that is warm, safe, and dry. And when we think about learning in buildings and architectural structures, warm, safe, and dry is typically where we come in. That's our base. And many of our students in the United States and globally, they don't have a warm, safe, and dry experience outside of school. So this building is really their safety, warm, safe, and dry, where they find food. So the US and public schools are having to reimagine what it means to keep kids warm, safe, and dry in all areas of education. So it's not so much the schooling and the outcomes, but how do we keep children safe and cognitively, socially, emotionally, and prepare them to reemerge in these transitions, as you so well brought up, Joanne. How will they grapple with leaving high school? Our graduates 2020 who are saying, I don't have a university to go to in an online experience. And as you brought up, Nasser, how do we pay for university that's designed to be in a brick and mortar experience, and now it's a click experience? What are some of the economic impacts that that's having not only on our public schools, but our public universities? And so for us in the US, really looking at the on-site experience versus the online experience, there's still a lack of transparency, which has left many of us as parents in an ambiguous situation of where will we place our children in the future. And so I'll leave it at that to move on to Gur.
Yeah. So Gur, this is perhaps a good opportunity to come back to your point that you raised a little earlier on really understanding the difference between education and schooling. Mm-hmm. And given sort of what Jules described, do you think we need to start really thinking about what it is an appropriate education in the 21st century? Is the content of the curriculum relevant? And how can some of these gaps, in terms of the story you shared with us about, giving children laptops and they have no interconnection, I mean, how can some of these gaps sort of be closed?
I think there's a couple of points, Lawrence, and I think it's a very confusing scenario. So let me work on the UK one, right? So everybody's trying very hard to get, or the government certainly, to get schools reopened. How we reopen schools is actually, I would argue, not an educational matter, but it's an economic one, because we start with the little ones. We want them to come to school very quickly so that mum and dad can go to work. The older ones can stay at home and do their own thing. That's what it feels like. So there's a confusion as to why we do this. And I think that confusion needs unpacking. If you wanted to do it, in my view, sensibly, you would bring in the 15-year-olds and the 17-year-olds, the ones who've got examinations next year, and the 16-year-olds and the 18-year-olds, the ones that are transitioning, and of course the 11-year-olds too. And that's where you would start with in terms of your educational care. The other observation is this one. If my car breaks down, I take it to a garage. The garage has an expert, and the expert fixes my car or tells me to buy a new one or whatever. Yeah. It seems to me that in terms of opening schools, reopening and restarting, government is ignoring the experts and seems to rely in its guidance on people who don't know the communities, who don't know the children, who don't know the parents, who don't know how the learning and teaching goes on. So I think they're the first observations. Then I think I worry a great deal what schooling and education, if we think of schooling in UK terms, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 9 to 4, 192 days a year, and we think of education from the second you're born until the second you pass on. And Joanne's point earlier also about purpose. I've always thought that out of school learning experiences, the biggest contribution they can make is, apart from awe and wonder, the biggest contribution they can make is give a sense of purpose and allow the children to write their own narrative of the possible, join up the dots. And I think we're going to be ruled by a time of fear and a time of understandable obsession with safety to such a degree that experiences out of school will become, at best, entirely online experiences. And I think we need to have a big discussion as to what we want to do with this education piece and what the schooling role within that is. And we need to be extraordinarily mindful that there's a very big risk that the gap between have and have not, and therefore can and cannot, may become greater than it has ever been. And I think the role of government lies in safeguarding and enabling this, but it needs to utilize the expertise that, for example, lies with a group like Beacon House. What your group can offer to make things better across the piece needs to be harnessed, needs to be sought, and needs to be utilized. So as consumers, so to speak, we also need to stop looking solely to governments for solutions. We need to become active in finding and providing those ourselves.
Okay, thanks, Gerd. Nasser, this is a sort of great opportunity for you to come in here because in terms of the work you're doing within, not only within Beacon House, but within the country. So would you like to respond to what Dr. Gers just said?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said that, questions of equity really are key. I've been heavily, what's happened, I think, in the last couple of months, while this crisis has been going on, is, schools have gotten a crash course in, using technology to educate kids. And, something which we might not have done in 10 years or 5 years. We've had to really go through a steep learning curve and really learn the tools of the trade and deliver online education as effectively as we can. But of course there's a asymmetry in the availability of devices at home. Currently the vast majority of the population in developing countries doesn't have access to those sort of devices. So I think even now during the crisis and even post-crisis, I feel that there's going to be a transformation, and you're going to have more hybrid models coming in. I think schools which have gotten accustomed to using technology, and teachers, though they do struggle, but they're getting better at using technology. It's become a necessity now. I think schools will start delivering more robust hybrid learning models to their students. So I think in that sort of a situation, it becomes extremely important to find ways and means of making technology and connectivity available to a larger number of people, so that it doesn't just become, obviously, education or quality education for the wealthy or the privileged, but rather, the larger population is able to, take advantage of this digital transformation. And I think that's something that, the private sector has to look into, governments have to look into. It is something, in fact, that, we are looking into. One of the companies that we've invested in at Beacon House, organization called Knowledge Platform, has actually developed a very scalable primary and secondary curriculum. It's an assessment and lesson delivery platform, which can be used in a completely self-learning environment. And, essentially, that platform, it's our ambition that platform should be a vehicle, for increasing equity and providing, a high quality of education to everyone in the country. But, one of the problems we face, the primary problem, is device and connectivity availability. And so we've been thinking long and hard. We're in touch with device manufacturers, various people, to try to find solutions to that issue, which can work for the majority of people in Pakistan. And I think that that's something that the government of Pakistan now also needs to start thinking about. How, because, I think it's now, it's been established that internet connectivity is a fundamental human right. And, this underlies why that's the case, because if you don't have access to technology, you will not have access to the same knowledge base that the rest of humanity has access to. You will not have access to the same learning materials, the same education programs. Connectivity has become a scaffold for so many other things. I think that is absolutely key. And I think, even we have my fellow panelists are from more developed countries. And I'm somewhat surprised to hear that the same concerns of inequity exist over there. But you can imagine those same concerns are probably multiplied tenfold in a country like Pakistan. So on the one hand, where I feel that, the rapid learning that we've had to do in adopting digital technology in improving education will be beneficial to a lot of students. At the same time, I do worry that if the differences in technology and connectivity availability are not addressed, it could lead to a huge asymmetry and a further gap between the knowledge base and the opportunities of the haves and have-nots in developing countries. So it needs to be a top agenda item for the private sector and for the government in such countries.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Nasser. I think it'd be really good to move along to go back to the personal, as Gur mentioned, because we've got probably thousands of parents and students tuning into this discussion. So two questions I think would be good to look at is how you see the role of parents and teachers changing, because they're not going to go back to what they were. And what kind of advice would you offer parents and teachers? We've seen some of the hilarious sort of memes going around about parents being stuck at home with online learning. But the reality is it's probably been a very tough time. So Joanne, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for framing it that way, Lawrence. It's an excellent way of framing. In a way, what are the golden lessons learned? I mean, one thing that seems very clear to all of us is this crisis has revealed the enormous potential for innovation that's lying latent in education systems everywhere. So you kind of have this amazing experiment that in 50 years' time, people will write about the history of 2020 as being the crucial moment where, in a way, and in the worst possible way in terms of the loss of life and the impact on the economy. So I am not underestimating the global massive impact. But in terms of the paradigm shift that is potentially that we are all sensing here, and that's why this panel is so timely, that this has really revealed on a global scale that you can really have an experiment. I would say less about technology, although technology is an important point, and Nasser's reminded us about the importance of connectivity as a human right, basically, and as a learning right, an enabler, as Jill rightly pointed out, as in safe and secure and being able to use these tools. But very importantly, the shift from school-based schooling, something that is done to you as you are parked in an institution for X number of years, to the idea of a lifelong learner, a self-directed learner. That for me is the most interesting piece to sort of look through in the weave of this very confusing time. So what if we really want our students to become self-directed learners ready for the opportunity and challenges of the future? What can we learn from this global experiment in sort of sink or swim global experiment of self-directed learning? And there are some lessons which are really important to bring out here. The first one, and people have said this before, is access to technology as a platform. Yes, very important, almost a precondition. At this point, much of the rich learning of the resources are there. However, what's come out very, very clearly from this very quick survey of 1,300 respondents is the essential role of the teacher, that most of the access to curriculum content was not through clicking onto a faceless platform, it was teacher mediated. So either with online teaching, but also in terms of active exercises and shepherding of students. And I think this is very important, that we think about teachers. What is the role of the many, many heroic teachers that we all know and have been in contact with? But also, what are their needs? Have we thought about this as a profession? So if we look at teachers as a knowledge profession, who have basically their professional lives have been turned upside down, and within 2 days, they suddenly had to equip themselves, most of them with very little professional development. Some better, some worse, some more support, less support, but essentially alone. Teachers have had to reinterpret curriculum, reinterpret modalities, and learn technology very quickly. So that essential role of the teacher comes to the forefront in constructing this new hybrid model. And you said rightly, it's a personal issue. So what is the personal equation of learning? If you put the student at the center with their mentor relationship with a teacher, but also with the larger community, so their family, their neighborhood, what does that look like? What does that model of education look like? Which, as Ger said, doesn't stop at 4 o'clock on a given Tuesday. It's lifelong and life-wide learning. And I think if we don't grasp this paradigm shift that is offered to us, and that essentially, to my mind, has revealed that many have certainly sunk, and this is what we're talking about in terms of the long-term worries about the inequitable impact, but some have also flown, have seen that self-directed learning empowers them in important ways. So I think we need to also do more research, understand more about what are the deeper trends going on. And on that note, I just want to flag to people that the amount that OECD countries invest in public health research is 17 times higher than what is invested in public education research. One of the biggest problems of the education sector, and this is not new and it's nothing to do with COVID-19, is that this is a knowledge sector with knowledge workers called teachers, which is very under-researched and very poorly provided for in terms of continuous professional development. So I hope, personally, my personal hope is what emerges from this agenda is the centrality of that intimate relationship between a teacher and their student, and equipping both with the equipment and skills to flourish in this new paradigm. Thanks.
Thank you, Joanne. Jill, over to you.
I love what Joanne said, and I think being a math teacher in middle school for many years, when she said the personal equation of a learner, I think there are three parts to that equation, or three variables. And one that is traditionally left out on most of our panels is student voice. What does the learner of today want in their equation? And how do we look at those variables? Who makes up those variables? Students, the teacher voice, the parent or caregiver voice, and then our industry partners and our experts. In my role, I've spent a lot of time training and using project-based learning, and now in an online format. And part of our online project-based learning format is training for the teacher, the parent or caregiver, and the student combined together for what does it look like to implement self-directed learning at home with a virtual teacher experience, with a parent working online who can't be there as the direct teacher support in the space. How do we connect and put together that equation so student voice is at the forefront, the teachers and the parent or the caregiver, because many times it's not the parent. And I say that from a very personal experience. I've been fortunate enough to have my in-laws here from Minneapolis, and they've been helping with online education because I'm in meetings training teachers and parents and working with students every day. And the other part of that equation, I think that we are not pulling to the forefront when it comes to student voice is student to student teaching. What does it look like when we talk about supporting the teacher role? How do we elevate students from being the token voice to true co-creation and design of curriculum and skill sets and instruction? Because as we move into this new era and a hybrid model, and we've got students who are self-directed because they have to be, and they have to find outlets and resources, how are they leaning on each other? How are they creating and building the new skill sets that we as adults don't even know exist yet, because we're elevating their voice in co-constructing what that future looks like? So as we start to move into this new era, I think that personal learning equation really needs to be industry partners, students being able to connect with experts in industry to work on projects together, and students being experts and parents and teachers working together to really elevate those skills. So as we come out and emerge and we start to build these hybrid plans, really focusing on who's part of that equation. What are the variables we choose to put in, and really not using students as token voice, but truly using them as creators of their own future and building those new skill sets.
Okay, yeah, very important. So Gur, this is such an important sort of question and issue currently in education. Curriculum relevance, because that's what Jules, the underlying premise here is, well, what is the relevance of a curriculum if students don't have any agency in it or they don't have any voice in it? Do you think it's time to start looking deeply into the relevance of curricula right from K through to 12 schooling?
I think yes. Yes is the answer, Lauren. So that's me done now. No, not really. but that's kind of yes. I think that just some observations around this. We have an opportunity now, perhaps, to move ahead, to think differently. So there's a very famous Scottish Glaswegian comedian called Billy Connolly. I highly recommend Billy Connolly. And he reflects in a comical way, he reflects on life. And one of the observations he made about his youth, Billy Connolly's in his 80s now, I think, he makes about his youth is that he grew up in Glasgow, where the industry was shipbuilding. And the purpose of school for most children was to be able to be taught to work so that when the school gates opened, and at the same time the shipyards gates opened, all those thousands would transition from the school to be a good shipbuilder, welder, whatever they would be, right? So the purpose of that mass education. And I think globally still, we have a system, education systems, that still reflect that model. Yet at the same time, we know from real life that education piece is now personalized, that people do not have one job, that people, even within the job that they may have, that they will still change their roles 10 times, whatever it is. So I think it's an entirely different piece. And I think that brings me to the question, who are the teachers? And it's my wife's mantra as a principal of two schools here in Sheffield, that every child is everyone's responsibility. So neither can you can't have the school saying, this is what the government demands, here, this curriculum, here are the tests, this is the finished product. Neither can you have a situation whereby you have industry and employment saying every year, because this is what happens every year, the examination results are published, and every time employers every year, they will say, but what you are delivering to us isn't quite what we're looking for. So I think they need to come off the fence, roll up their sleeves and help too. So who are the teachers, and what is the role of schooling, and what is the role of education? So also, here's an irony. I've been told for many years, as you have, Lawrence, that technology would make life easier. In fact, it would mean that we work less. Yeah, and I have a global role, and my phone never stops. 24 hours, ping, 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 the thing goes off. So far we haven't got there yet. But hopefully in future we will come to a point where our young people, when they're adults, will have fewer days that they work. Will they know what to do with those days? Will they be able to deploy themselves purposefully? So I think we need to look at who are the teachers. The teachers are in industry. Parents are teachers. Yeah, just because parents pay taxes or pay fees to send their children to school doesn't mean they can absolve their responsibilities. And it has to be very clear. My chin's hit the floor on a number of occasions over the last couple of months in terms of those kind of reactions. Schools need to bring down fences, metaphorically also. So I think we need to put the child in the middle. We need to ask ourselves the question, what is this thing for? And who does it serve? And then we need to reconfigure. And many of the things we're doing, we will be able to continue to do. Because quite frankly, and simply put, if you can't read or write, you're not going to go far. But I think we do need to keep connecting with that sense of purpose. And at the same time, we need to have the teacher as the carer and the almost being in loco parentis, because I think much change may lead to much anxiety in the young people too. And we need to create levels of confidence whereby that becomes a positive challenge rather than a fear and a dread. That's where I roughly think all of this is. So it's a slightly longer answer than the yes, Lawrence, in the end.
No, it's very, very pertinent. And I think it's quite contentious too, because I think there would be sort of a significant number of parents who would delineate and say, well, I'm sorry, but my role is, that's not my role. But be that as it may. So Nasser, this is very interesting. I'm sure from your point of view as a businessman, and I think we touched upon this, how the reopening of schools is linked to an economy. So in sort of bringing some of these threads together, particularly, Jill talking about different models of schooling, hybrid models, and if children are going to be learning from home. Nasser, do you think it's time to start rethinking the world of work? If parents are going to be sort of supporting children at home, would a 4-day week work? So how is the sort of the working economy going to gel with the educational landscape?
Absolutely. Yeah, Dr. Burke, it's a very important question. I would like to sort of begin by sort of carrying on from something that Dr. Gurr said, which is that I think parents and teachers do need to redefine their role in the education of their children. I do understand that there are certain limitations. Parents are working, and providing more than a certain amount of support is challenging due to the work limitations. But realistically, the current model of education that we have is completely ill-equipped to prepare children for the world that they're going to enter. I think Dr. Gurr alluded to the fact that the existing system was designed for the Industrial Revolution and for a world where basically not only did you do the same job your entire life, but sometimes your children and their children did the same job that you were doing. So, it was geared towards, teaching children to operate within that very systemic, organized, structured economic system where essentially they are, log in the overall system. Of course, the world is now changing drastically, and I would say, in fact, the school closure because of COVID is possibly an opportunity to reflect on where education is. We've had to take a break. We've had to deploy novel ways of educating children, and I think that it's time that when schools reopen, we need to think about how these technologies can now be used to really elevate education to a 21st century paradigm. Self-directed learning has become a necessity during the times of COVID, but I would say that self-directed lifelong learning, in fact, is probably the most important skill school students now. Going forward, it's estimated that 60% of the jobs that primary school children will be employed in the future don't even exist right now. So when, in that sort of a situation, in that sort of paradigm, there's no way that you can educate children for a specific role. The only thing you can educate them to do is to be good learners, to be adaptive, to be creative, to think out of the box. And if you're not able to do that, you will do them a tremendous disservice in a world where there's an increased use of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robotics in almost every sphere of life. People who are non-creative will simply have no role in future economies. And I think the sad reality is for parents, unfortunately, who feel school's role to educate their children, that in order to provide students with the type of scaffolding they need to be self-directed learners, the parents probably do need to have a slightly greater role. So I see that I know in Beacon House we want to change the learning paradigm. We want it's people talk about the flipped classroom model. I think that's becoming increasingly pertinent. With access to technology, children can learn basic, they can gather information and do a lot of the type of learning they do in classrooms at home. And then the classroom can become an environment where they collaborate, communicate, learn how to work in teams, learn how to solve problems. But in order to do that, the teacher will have to change his or her role from being a purely instructional leader to being a facilitator of self-learning. And the parents will have to provide some scaffolding so that they're able to be ready for the type of real-world experiences that the classroom is going to be giving them. Now, if both parties refuse to do that, and I'll admit that there are challenges in doing that, then unfortunately, the children that we raise today will not be ready for that future. So there are challenges, but I think we need to speak to parents about this. I'm sure that parents can take out, an hour and a half every day from their Netflix watching time to really, provide scaffolding and support to their kids to enable them to be 21st century learners. So it's my hope that as detrimental as COVID-19 has been for education, it's an opportunity for self-reflection and for us to gather some of the thoughts we've had over the last decade and really go forward in a more positive and relevant way.
Okay, right. Well, okay. Thanks, Nasser. So we've got 4 parents on our panel. Yeah. What kind of advice, as parents, would you give parents about helping their children to become self-directed lifelong learners? Because it's a tricky one, isn't it? It's linked to intrinsic motivation. It's linked to the psychological development of a child. So as seasoned parents, what kind of advice would you give other parents? Joanne, do you want to start? Yeah.
Well, that's an excellent question. So just sort of for total transparency, so I'm the mother of a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old, two boys. And so I like to quip that I have PISA aged kids at home. I can see what it means in terms of their motivation for learning, which is up and down depending on the day and depending on the task. So I think the honest answer, and if parents are honest with themselves and the children that they are blessed with raising, is that there is a natural curiosity, which is in children of all ages. Of course, we see it unfettered, maybe between 0 and 5. Then it becomes a little less cool when you're a teenager, but you're still very interested in many things. So I think one of the aspects when we're talking in these very technical terms of self-directed learner and curriculum training is to try and understand that whole person who is in front of you, no matter what age they are, 7 or 17, and understand what motivates them, because it's the hook of motivation that will lead you then to approach problem solving. And one of the aspects that we do a lot of work on, and I will bring it back to work because I've had insights as a parent to this from OECD work, on the intrinsic importance of motivation for learning. Do you understand why you're learning this? Do you understand what it is for? What is it benefiting you? We spend precious little time explaining to middle and high school students the purpose of any of the activities they are signed up to do. And I think that's a great loss because we're not helping them develop what we say in our other policy pamphlets are social emotional skills of critical thinking, of checking your data, of inquiry, project, life is a project-based learning. It's the biggest project you've got, life. So you better equip yourself with these skills. And these skill sets that are both cognitive and non-cognitive are important. And it's really important for us to focus on this, not just for economic outcomes, for them to be able to, every parent wants their kid to be able to, have a livelihood and be autonomous, responsible citizens, but also for their health outcomes, for their mental health and physical health outcomes, for their ability to participate actively in society. The OECD's got a lot of research on the link through our adult skills survey, PIAC, on the link between low-skilled adults and their propensity to take care of their own health or participate actively in society. So it is absolutely crucial that we get this right when we're talking about K to 12. My hope is that both parents and teachers focus very much more on social emotional skills, on what they are. They can be assessed, they can be measured, they can be taught. It is purposeful. It doesn't just happen to you to learn collaboration or good communication skills or self-regulation of your emotions or recognizing otherness. And I think what is really important, and you will forgive me because I do work for a data-heavy organization, is if we cannot measure what we value, then it will always fall off the policy table when discussed. Okay, if we cannot measure and demonstrate the measurable value of social emotional skills, which is something that our director is now shifting very much towards, then it's going to be very hard to win that argument. And I would like to sort of just add and flag a cautionary note from this survey we just recently did, which is that in about 60% of the respondents from these 59 countries said that during the lockdown, there was a retreat to core basics. There was a retreat to literacy and numeracy because the curriculum could not be delivered as designed. And so the forces that we are having to reckon with as we come out of this with our very, very exciting and I think correct collective crafting of this new paradigm, let us not underestimate the emphasis of status quo and of the comfort of just focusing on core. So I think that's one thing I would leave us with, is just to be very vigilant that these type of issues of wanting to return to basics because of lost time or because of inequity will be very strong. And we need to be aware of our arguments and of our data. Thanks.
Thanks, Joanne. Jill, for you as a parent, what kind of sort of advice would you offer other parents, particularly at the moment, and particularly in terms of lifelong learning, intrinsic motivation, and so on?
So as a mother of a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old, it's been very important as a parent to really think about three things: empathy and showing your emotions and really empathizing from all roles, and looking at the round table of emotions, from the emotions of teachers, parents, school, children and their friends. Who comes to the round table when we think about social and emotional learning, and starting to elevate that and create meaningful conversations with your children about how they feel about, for many of them, 2020 feels like a failure when it comes to what they deem school success. So how do we deal with those emotions as parents? And I think the second thing that for me has been really valuable as a parent is knowing that I don't have to do it all by myself. I have dear friends who are computer experts. So when my children are working on something, I don't have to be the expert. I can connect them with other parents. And those parents can connect with me because I love teaching their children the base 10 model and algebra. And I would happily support your children learning algebra or fractions while you help my children dig apart complex texts, because we all have our own passions as adults. And so how do we use empathy? How do we develop resources? And how do we model for our students what it means to, and our children, what it means to be that student still, to walk away from the screen with a curiosity and look outside the window if you can't go outside. Get outside and get your hands dirty, making with our children and being with them. And so how do we start to put that all together with our children so they see us and our caregivers, that they see us as having purpose and passion in their future, and connecting that purpose and passion so that they see it and we discuss it and talk about it. So that's how I would come at that as a parent.
Okay, thank you, Jill. Gur, for you?
I've got a 24-year-old who was working in London, and a 22-year-old who's just come out of Oxford University, and a 14-year-old. And when my eldest daughter was born, I bought several books as to how to be a good parent, and none of them are worth anything, because you first and foremost, you know what, you make it up as you go along, and so the first thing is just love your kids. Right? It's as easy as that. I think make time, and where there are two parents, that's easier. But make time. Just make time for whatever, but make time to be with your kids. Work with your school. They're on your side. The teacher likes your child as much as you love them. So they aren't enemies. Be in touch. That's what they're there for. Enable. Don't do things for them, but help them along. If my 14-year-old comes with a maths or science homework, I'm entirely lost. But I might know somebody who is not entirely lost, or I'm quite good at saying Google. Yeah. So those things, I think those things work to support. One of the plus sides of the last 8 or 10 weeks is we have 2 dogs, and I now walk them with my daughter, and so we get an hour to an hour and a half where we talk about everything and anything, including school, and including lessons, and including what's hard, and including how much you like Spanish, and all those things. And then I think finally, you know what, lead by example, because that's where good habits come from, and that includes work routine. So I work from home. My wife works from home quite a bit, but she also goes to school because they're open for vulnerable children and kids of key workers. Leading by example leads to good habits, and if you put all those things in a bag and shake it, you're probably not going to be ever so far off. But don't buy my book, whatever you do.
Thank you so much. And Nessa, just before we go to Q&A, what are your thoughts on this as a parent?
Yeah, so I have a 10-year-old, 10-year-old, 7-year-old, and a 20-day-old. So yeah, so the 20-day-old is still predominantly sleeping and drinking milk. But you know, the older kids, what I've realized is, they're so different, from what they are. And sorry, you guys hear me? I think my
Yes, you're
connection
coming
may
back.
have,
It's okay.
am I audible?
Yeah,
I'm coming back. Okay. They're so sure of what their interests are and what their passions are. That you have to, I think, deal with them differently. I think especially in a country like Pakistan, where we traditionally have had a very top-down structure where so children are seen more as recipients of instruction and parents are these strong authority figures who know what's happening in the world. I think today's children have a lot of exposure. They're able to, they have access to audio, video content, diverse international points of view. So, you have to young age as as thinking sensible self-aware people, and I think you have to engage with them in a manner that reflects that you respect their point of view and perspective and that you aren't some all-knowing authority figure, which from a Western perspective may not sound that unusual, but in a country like Pakistan and many other countries like this, parents have a tendency still to behave that way sometimes. And if you do want your children to be innovative, creative, I think and really fit into the 21st century paradigm, I think you need to give them the space to think and grow and challenge you whenever they feel that they disagree with you. So I mean, absolutely. I mean, as Dr. Greer said, you have to love your children, spend time with them, but you have to respect their perspective, their point of view. Uh, and let them whatever you say is as valid and meaningful as what anyone else would say, whether an adult or young person. So I think that mutual respect has become the hallmark of, I would say, 21st century parenting, as opposed to, let's say, 20th century parenting paradigm. So that's very important for me.
Good. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, everybody, for your sharing those personal stories about your own personal lives as parents. We're going to jump into some Q&A now. And thank everybody. I thank everybody for sending in their questions. We may not get through them all, but because we have them, we will work out some way of responding to them. So, yeah, we have over 500 questions. So we're not going to have to get through all of those. Yeah. I'll simply, I can see them. I'll ask the question and somebody can just jump in and answer. I think that's probably the easiest way. So first question, we don't know where they're from, unfortunately. Many parents are turning to online educational technology, but is it safe? Yeah.
Can I have a quick? Can I quickly try to respond to that?
Please.
Yeah. I mean, look, everything in life is a double-edged sword. I mean, nuclear energy is a double-edged sword. It can be used to destroy. It can also be used, if it's used safely and responsibly, to address a lot of the world's energy problems. There's so many other things. I think to shy away from technology out of fear of how it can be used inappropriately by children is to deprive them of one of the most powerful tools that they could possibly have, and a tool that they'll inevitably get anywhere in the 21st century. So yes, there are some risks, but technology can be made safe. Most technology companies now offer robust parental management solutions on their platforms. You can, I'm an Apple user. You can sort of restrict almost every element of how your child uses the device, from screen time of individual apps to what websites they can visit. I mean, once you go, it's extremely robust. So I think there are more and more robust parental management technologies available, and if used in conjunction with that, it can certainly be made safe enough that the benefits far outweigh the risks, really.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks.
Lawrence, sorry, can I just very quickly come in on this? I think
Yes,
there's
please.
also I think this is absolutely right, but I also think we need to be mindful, and it takes me back to talk to your teachers and talk to your school, because there's also a safety element as to how good the content is, how relevant the content is, because you know what, there's brilliant stuff out there and there's rubbish out there, and sometimes we need to go, and refer back to my earlier example of the car, we need to go to the expert to help us think that through. So there's another case for the relationship between the school and the parent to be strengthened.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Jill, this is almost a sort of fit for purpose question for you. How can we make online learning more attractive, more engaging, rather than just a sort of a screen type looking experience?
Absolutely. When we think about life as being a project-based learning world, and that's what we really exist in, developing online experiences that are authentic, they're relevant, and that's what lifts out the complexity of the content for our learners when they find relevancy, when they see their work being used in an authentic way, rather than just hitting a submit button and never hearing back. Really creating collaborative experiences with tools that have been designed in the technology industry to be collaborative and to be a social platform, because our children are living in a socially connected world. So really designing project-based learning experiences that capitalize on what kids want and need. And the majority of what we're hearing is the connection. How do I connect others to make meaning of these experiences? So that engagement comes through developing truly authentic and relevant experiences that are aligned to these complex content experiences that we're hoping our kids come out with. And that can be very challenging. And how do we connect to authentic, relevant experiences? We do that by asking kids what they're interested in. And so bringing them into that conversation.
Fantastic. Thanks. Joanne, this is almost a sort of a fit for purpose question for you. I'll try and summarize it because it's a paragraph. Basically, schools are promoting kids without exams. All children have their own ways of sort of coping with this new system. They have ways of coping with exams. Is it right to have online exams where cheating can take place? Or how will parents allow exams to take place at schools in countries where the virus is spreading? There's kind of two sort of angles to that a bit, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, the worries and concerns of parents and students is legitimate about the certification aspect of school. We can't underplay that. This is creating a massive amount of anxiety. It's very hard to tell students and families that doing well in school and finishing whatever piece of certification is necessary as a ticket to your future work success, and then suddenly say, well, we won't be doing it. It's not that important. It's extremely important. Those messages, managing those messages about public safety being more important than certification of school leavers exams is a very delicate one, right? And it's a very difficult one to digest for teachers, students, and families. So we can't underestimate how conflicting that message is from our governments. That said, it's extremely important that we have ways of ongoing assessment. So one of the issues that plays out here is that some school systems in the world have sort of at the very end of all courses certification, and others have more continuous assessment and continuous assessment through assignments through the year, for example. And that actually is an important aspect of what we've all been talking about, project-based learning, about schools as catalysts for learning. there has to be some form of assessment. It's important. Assessment is important to be able to understand where you are in your learning journey, where your gaps are, what you as a learner struggle with. So I think it is a legitimate worry about this sort of academic year. Having said that, we do also need to, and I would like to sort of insert this point as a part of the answer, we do need to also equip schools with the information that they do need about students' learning outcomes, both for cognitive and non-cognitive. And that's where our work with PISA for Schools comes in, because being able to offer schools a tool which is anonymized testing of your 15-year-olds as a cohort to get a sense of where those students are in terms of high proficiency literacy or low proficiency literacy, not an average number, but an idea of the distribution of who is struggling, is extremely important, because what we've been talking about here, and Gera mentioned it at the beginning, the importance of leadership. Well, leadership will be coming from school principals and teachers. That is extremely important for us to put the Lexus of leadership, not at some National Ministry of Education, which has an important role of coherence and fairness and equity across a nation state. But if we're really looking for bottom-up innovation, we're going to have to equip these autonomous school units with good and meaningful data about not just learning outcomes, but well-being, and also this propensity of understanding the value of learning itself. And that's why we think that the PISA questionnaire, which is delivered to schools through PISA for Schools, is a very rich piece of insight to get a bit of a temperature of how that student cohort is grappling with these issues. So just to say, we really have to get away from simply the ticking the box credentialing of having completed a certain learning journey to make it more of an adaptive and rich process.
Thank you very much, Joanne. This question comes back to something that you spoke of earlier. So the person asking is saying, if 40% of people don't have any kind of device for online learning, how are they supposed to study? And secondly, the problem we have is with online classes, that teachers are giving a lot of homework, assuming parents know how to do it. So what's your sort of initial response?
I think two things. One is, let me answer the last part first, because I think we are where we are, yeah. And I think we're in a better place than many of us had expected. So is it perfect? No, it's not. Are we doing okay-ish? Yes, we probably are. And will we do better next time? I'm confident that we will. Yeah. So yes, teachers will have to, and schools and systems, organizations will have to come to terms with the kind of work, the kind of planning. The word was mentioned earlier, to become a facilitator. I mean, I'll throw a percentage at you here, Lawrence. The Louvre in Paris annually has 9 million visitors. Yeah. In April and May, it now has a children's section as well on its website. In April and May alone, it had 10.5 million visitors. Yeah. So the point is, where we will become better is utilizing the other resources that exist out there rather than reinventing the wheel. But hey, this thing was sprung upon us, and I think I think we're doing quite well. In terms of the 40%, this is going to sound a little bit like a cop-out, but it isn't. I think there are two things. I can foresee very easily that there will be an international and national movements that begin to talk about internet access as a utility. Yeah, and with that, the private sector will change in its attitudes and its provision in terms of hardware access. Yeah, but also at the same time, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's a principal director of a school in India, and it's a very mixed school, so they can do some stuff online, and the children come from quite remote communities and they can't do the online bit. And they did the very brilliant thing, I think it's amazing. They used the school bus to transport work. So in the morning, instead of the children coming to school, the work goes on the bus, it's collected, it's done, and it's sent back. And it goes back to Joanne's point, good leadership by schools and teachers and principals will lead to brilliant practical solutions. This thing will take a bit of time, but what we can't afford to do is lose sight of that 40%, because if we do that, we failed. End of story.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Nessa, what are your thoughts on this question? This is something that you've spoken of quite often, about the fairness in the evaluation of student work. And so the person's asking, what must be done to guarantee fairness in the evaluation of distance learning and online learning?
I take the question to mean essentially that if students are doing assessments at home, how can we ensure that those assessments are being done fairly and they're not cheating? Is that what I should imply that the question is asking? Yeah, I mean, it's something we struggle with. I mean, Dr. Burke and I have had conversations about this only very recently. And so he's probably, as equipped to answer the question as I am, really, perhaps better so. That is something which we need to keep in mind. There are certain solutions available. I'm going to give a sort of very technical, sort of specific answer to this. There are some companies now which have solutions available that allow you to try to reduce the chance that someone cheat or take assistance on an online exam, by not giving you access to any other material on your laptop. One of the things I've been discussing with Dr. Burke is if we can come up with a solution that can, because most devices now have cameras on them. So while the student is taking an exam, the camera automatically turns on. You have certain software restrictions which prevent them from accessing anything but the exam that they're doing on the computer, and you can monitor them through the camera. So I think if you use a multitude of technologies, you can reduce the chances of people misusing this facility from home. And it's something that we're looking at right now quite carefully, because Beacon House is exploring hybrid and online models and how to ensure the efficacy of online examination is something that's really important to us. So there are ways of doing it. There are technological solutions available, and we're exploring them. So it's not an undoable thing, but I fully admit that it's something that is a problem that schools are having to deal with and address.
Thank you very much, Nessa. So in the last remaining minutes, there's a question. I think it's a fascinating question. Perhaps you all could give just a brief comment on it. So how do you see the impact of increased digitalization on the social skills of children? The rest of it talks about the potential to produce humans, fully humans, not hybrid humans. But how do you see the impact of increased digitalization, online learning, impacting on the social skills of children? Just briefly from everybody, because we're nearly out of time.
So I would like to answer that very quickly by saying, as Jill said, authentic experiences. If you look at any 14-year-old, as I do very often, playing PS4 with multiple friends and working out strategy as they bring down whatever alien they're suddenly tackling, you can see there's a great deal of social interaction. It's about leadership, about coordination of strategy. Now, I don't want to elevate that to some sort of pinnacle of achievement in my 14-year-old, but it is very important to recognize that authentic and purposeful project-based achievables are actually very important for the student age that we're talking about here. So gamification, which is a collaborative endeavor, not an individual endeavor, can be crafted for educational purposes where students are also helping each other and not just propped on a single teacher or evaluator. So I think there's a great deal more that needs to be done in exactly that direction. Thank you.
Okay, great.
And to add to that, I think that we can develop students based on their passions, and group students to engage in dialogue online about what's relevant for them, what's authentic to them. So we don't have to continue to batch them by their age, but really connecting and developing those social skills based on personal interests and passions, and students developing projects together on their interests, meaning that they join these panels together with a common goal and focus, just like we've done here today.
Okay, fantastic.
I think, Lawrence, well guided. You know, things can go one way or another, but I think well guided and well supported, it'll be great. I look at my 14-year-old. I see how on the one hand she has a live lesson, and on another device she is talking about that lesson to 4 or 5 of her classmates. I think how incredibly skilled these young people are in all sorts of ways digitally through social media. I would put the case that we need to consider our 14 and 15-year-olds as potential teachers, and I think we should pay them. I think how brilliant if my daughter would be perfectly capable, and probably more so, certainly more so than me, to go into a school environment and help 7, 8, 9-year-old cope with some of those things. I think we need to embrace this and give them responsibilities.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Nasser, finally.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the other panelists, and I just want to take on from what Joanne said, follow on from what Joanne said. I think that there's an assumption, social skills aren't limited to face-to-face physical interactions, and technology is exist for. So I completely agree. The type of interaction that the kids have when they're playing an online multiplayer game is as valuable as any interaction they may possibly have on the playing field. I mean, I know it may be, it's a very 20th century way of thinking that only physical interactions are meaningful. I think physical interactions are extremely meaningful. I don't want to undermine them, but virtual interactions are becoming increasingly meaningful, and they have the benefit of being able to take place over large geographical distances, which is a major benefit. So you can have international large collaborative groups. So children are better at communicating and collaborating in some ways because we simply didn't have those tools available to us when we were growing up. So I think the technology can be a great enabler if used properly. And we are kids have to work together in the future because of technology.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Nasser. Okay, so well, it's come to 2:30, and our time is up. And to all the people who have tuned in, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm sorry we couldn't get all your questions. To the panel, thank you so much for giving us your time. It's just been absolutely fantastic. It's been so interesting. Jill, it must be 4 or 5 in the morning now. So we wish you a very good day, a very nice evening. And to people who are tuned in, please do take some time to give us feedback. So stay safe, follow the WHO guidelines, and look after yourselves and your families. Okay, goodbye from Lahore.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you. Thank you so much, Dr. Burke, and everybody else. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
See you soon, Lawrence.
Bye.